All right. So, I've been away from this a little bit longer than I meant to be, but here I am. Not really sure what I want to say, which is interesting. To me, I suppose. I've been putting this off for the better part of the 10-day because I haven't been sure exactly what I've been thinking about or what I've wanted to say, which again is an interesting thing to say when you're talking about talking to yourself. But I've gotten good over the last 35 years at shelving my thoughts and focusing on other things. So that's what I've been doing. I've been reading mostly. Well, I say reading, I listen to audiobooks. I've been listening to audiobooks and recording myself play Brotato. So maybe you'll benefit from that. I'll most certainly be posting the video that I've captured. Whether you find it beneficial or not is another thing. And so what I think I've boiled or narrowed it down to is I think I want to talk about labels. I think I want to talk about labels. But labels aren't really what's on my mind. Labels are a word, a topic that keeps coming up when I think, okay, well, let's think about topics. Labels and representation is another one. So I think that because I'm not entirely sure what exactly I'm thinking about, I've been avoiding current events, etc. Labels are a good place to talk about myself. So I was born in 1987, which means that I spent the first 13 years of my life before 9/11, and I've lived the subsequent 22 or 23 years since 9/11, 2001. What that really means is that I spent the better part of my childhood in the 90s and the better part of my ability to think after 2010 or thereabouts. When did I turn 25? Yeah, so like 2012. That took me a long time to do that math. I kept checking it and checking it and checking it. Like 25 is a difficult number to do math with. And what I remember most about the 90s is what I now understand to be a sort of ironic or maybe even a post-ironic rejection of labels, because now I understand that it was basically hipster or hippie characters who were rejecting labels in the 90s. But I didn't know that. I guess until just now, really, until thinking about it out loud. So I thought that the message of the 90s and what we were supposed to take away from having experienced the 90s, being people who experienced the 90s and people who would have children subsequent to the 90s would teach their children and the rules of the 90s, not the rules of the 90s, but rather what we learned from the 90s. And what I thought that was a rejection of labels, that labeling yourself comes with dire consequences. And I wonder why that is. I wonder if it's that the anti-label propaganda man of the hippies and the hipsters and stoners. I don't think it was wrong because I can see what they were saying and I've always agreed with it. But I wonder if it isn't a sort of Platonism. So rather than trying to suss that out, because I'm really not sure I even know what that thread means, I just had the thought and then tried to preface it so I could say it out loud. The logic behind why labels are bad kind of goes something like name badges, like there's a sort of abstract or metaphorical danger in wearing the wrong name badge to the wrong place. And it's sort of, I guess one of the broad archetypes that I've been wanting to talk about is clothing as a metaphor, because a metaphor that I've tried not to use, I have used it, but that I've tried not to use because I really need to talk about clothing as a metaphor, is when I used the mantling. I believe the phrase that I used was a responsibility mantling. And so what does it mean to mantle? And that's not really what I want to talk about. But a mantle is an article of clothing, and it was an article of clothing that identified your station. I believe a mantle would have been a priestly vestment, but regardless, I think that labeling, I think that the anti-labeling was sort of a don't be reductionistic, I believe. So like, it was presented to children, so I would have seen it a lot with school cliques. And so like, the idea was, well, don't label yourself as a goth or as a prep or as etc., because labeling yourself limits your social opportunities. My cat is trying to get into my fish tank for the first time ever. Labeling yourself limits your opportunities, and I suppose that in the teenage milieu where I would have run across it, the idea was to not limit your opportunities for social growth. So you don't want to limit your ability to meet new awesome people. And so that's one way to think about labels, right? So if you're always chasing fulfilling this label, and I suppose that's what I was talking about when I was talking about labeling yourself a thing, and I was asking how much of yourself you have to give up in order to fit into a group if you want to participate in a group identity. So I believe that the question that I asked is like how much of yourself do you have to give up to the groupthink of being a Republican in order to remain a Republican? And I suppose that's why I've hesitated a little bit to actually talk about labels, because I guess I've talked about labels in a sort of broad, a-specific sense quite a lot already. It's something I think about a lot. Because what you call yourself and what you aspire to be, they don't necessarily say a lot about you. I mean, they do say a lot about you, but we get them tangled up with who we are, I think is what I'm trying to say. So like, I think that there's a warning, or that there's a risk in wearing any particular label, and I guess there's a risk in wearing it that you'll lose yourself. But I think that it's better said, or maybe it's more accurately said, or maybe it's just more true, that I think what happens is that people want to pursue these labels to the detriment of ever acquiring a self. And so I don't really know what I'm talking about or what it means, but I feel like I see a lot of people that are very concerned with appearing to be something, whether it's something they're not or whether it's something they aspire to be is irrelevant. But they spend a lot of time wanting to look like a thing, but they never spend time to be a thing, I suppose, is what I'm thinking about. And so I think that with the risk of labeling yourself is, I suppose, the risk of self-congratulation. And I suppose the reason that the labeling thing probably went away is the same reason that you no longer hear people genuinely complain about the cult of self-congratulation that we currently exist in, or which is expressed in the meme of everybody getting a trophy, or the meme of being upset that everybody gets a trophy. And so maybe what it is that labeling, or not wanting to be labeled, is that same sort of thing as everybody getting a trophy. And so, like, you can have whatever label you want. And so what we did is, instead of saying, well, no, labels are bad, is we said, well, labels are largely meaningless and you can wear whatever label you want. And so I think that maybe, because, I've been highly critical of the AAVE, I guess, the African American community in the United States. But I do agree with them that if black is a culture and black is a thing, and if cultural appropriation is bad, then black isn't also a label. It beyond just the skin color, it is, even if it's an inadequate word, or yeah, I do think it's an inadequate word. It's too broad a word, because to be black in Oakland is different than to be black in New York, which is different than to be black in Louisiana. I mean, just because you have a skin color and there's a broadly defined ethnic prejudice against people with that skin color doesn't mean that the experiences are broadly the same, or that the culture itself is broadly the same and interchangeable. In fact, just those three communities of people don't get along especially well, and they shouldn't. There's no reason that they should, just because they look the same. But that's not really what I'm talking about. I don't remember why I brought that up, actually. I was going to say labels that you can't, just because I grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina, and among or around a bunch of black people, doesn't mean that in any way I am black, or that I can in any way label myself as black. And so, like, you'll see people argue for Eminem's blackness, and when Louis C.K., before he was a pariah, other black comics used to joke about how he was a card-carrying black guy, right? And so he was allowed to drop the N-bomb indiscriminately, right? Because he had permission from 2 or 3, I suppose, discriminating black men. And so he has this label, he has this they even used the term card, he has this certification. And I've broadly talked about certification before, and how we're largely critical, and the ancient world became, or not the ancient world, but the near modern world became largely critical of the of permature, of certification that was necessary for the trades, and how the trades themselves manage the certification rather than an uninterested group, which is how we largely do it today. Or at least, if the group isn't uninterested, the group is not the one making the direct hires. And that might not always be true, because I think that the Screen Actors Guild, in order to be on screen, you have to have a SAG certifications. But that's what a guild is. And so that's what the and I need to revisit all the talk that I did about the Yeoman Revolution, because I've realized since I did that talk, and I've gone back and I've revisited that time period very recently, this week in fact, I realized that nobody calls it that anymore. I don't know where I picked that up, but wherever I picked it up from, it's either antiquated or it was idiosyncratic to that historian or that teacher that I had that called it that, because nobody calls the 1400s the social upheaval of the 1300s, rather, and leading into the 1400s, the Yeoman Revolution. In fact, I've found it increasingly difficult to find historians who aren't, how do I want to put this, who aren't French, who will even admit that such a thing happened. When I say the Yeoman Revolution, what English historians would call that today is the peasant revolts, which is interesting because it wasn't peasants who revolted, and they weren't revolts anyway. They were largely peaceful, and they were just what I said. They weren't in fact the peasants. They were the bureaucrats. They were the middle class. So I need to revisit that in a serious way now that I've revisited it, but I revisited it from an English perspective, so I would like to revisit it from a French and a German and an Italian, at minimum, perspective before I talk about it again. But right, what I was working myself toward is wondering whether you can have a certification to participate in the ritual behavior of another culture. And the answer seems unequivocally to be yes, throughout time and place. That if you're accepted among a people, you're allowed to dress, act, and speak like them. And dressing, acting, and speaking like them is something that's going to be contentious for you until you stop living. Really, I mean, Sammy Davis Jr. never stopped arguing that he was white, and in fact, when he was roasted, they reminded him exclusively of his non-whiteness throughout the roast. So even then, when he, I suppose, was hoping that his white friends would accept him as white, what they did is remind him constantly that he wasn't. And so I wonder about certification, I wonder about labels, because, like, I don't want to use the example of Sammy Davis Jr. I don't know much about the man, and it seems his life and his experience seems tragic enough that I don't want to use him as an example of anything but a tragic life. And tragedy in art is designed to teach us, because the tragedy didn't have to happen. And so if we self-correct where they didn't, hopefully our lives won't turn out the same. And so in that way, I think that Sammy's life is instructive in that, trying to chase the label of white his whole life left him it left him with a tattered and maybe even without the ability to wear the black label. And so I wonder if labels don't force us into cognitive dissonance. They don't force us into positions where we have to be competing opposites within ourselves. And we're always competing opposites within ourselves, but something that I frequently think about is an old Aaron Tippin song where he talks about his dad saying to him when he was a boy that, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. And the next line of the chorus is, you got to be your own man, not a puppet on a string. that's a lofty goal, first of all, not being a puppet on a string, because that's a solitary life, first of all. And that's kind of, the song acknowledges that the dad of the song is a man that isn't especially beloved by the town, but they know that if they ever need his back, if he's allied with them ethically or morally, he'll be there. And that's, I don't know if that's what I'm thinking about. It's kind of what I'm thinking about. Because labels put you in a position to be a politician. And so I feel like maybe what I've done is I've picked the wrong topic. Maybe I can't talk about labels without talking about representation. And if I can't, and I don't know that I can talk about representation, which itself is a big topic that I don't think I fully understand. It's one that I've only been recently thinking about, which again is interesting for somebody who wanted to be a storyteller. Maybe I need to do it. Maybe let's talk a little bit, because I introduced the idea of the emperor and his new clothes, and I said that wasn't so much about merchants, right? It wasn't so much about being made a fool of by the people dressing you as the ritual of clothing. And so, I introduced the 14th century. We talked a little bit about it today, and so something I've been thinking about is, I guess, in that same way that I'm thinking about labels, I've been thinking about high school. I've been thinking a lot about high school. I suppose what I've been doing is revisiting my years in high school. In a lot of ways, because I've been trying to see maybe how I was perceived by other people while I was in high school, to maybe understand why that situation was the way that it was. And I don't know that I've learned anything. I would probably have to actually speak with my teachers and administrators, guidance counselor, whatever. I'd probably actually have to talk to other people that went to the school in order to come to any meaningful conclusions. But I never understood, not just in high school, before high school and then after high school. I never understood the necessity, or I don't know how else to expound on what I mean, but I never understood why it was important to people how you dress. I mean, up until now, I'm saying I've never understood. So, even as an adult, the last years of my employment, I've been unemployed for a while now, but the last years of my unemployment, I always tried to make my hair look really nice. Just keep my hair looking good, even though I wasn't working and I wasn't making good money. I was working at like a Dollar General or Red Robin or whatever. I was just working bullshit entry-level jobs. So I tried to make my hair look nice. And I think that being clean, having clean teeth, smiling, I would like to leave my beard a little messy. No, I can't grow a beard. My mustache, usually I would let my mustache stay long. And I don't know. I think that juxtaposition of things, I think it made me a complex person, and I think that mixed signal sending made me unlikable, because I wasn't only one thing. So that I didn't have a messy mustache or a long mustache and messy hair, that I had nice, professional looking hair, but this slightly long mustache. It coded that I was, or maybe that I smiled, but I'm tall and lanky. Gave off that, I don't know. I think that being a complex or a multifaceted person, I think that might code for danger. I think that might code for sociopathy or maybe even psychopathy. And so I never understood that. So like, well, I never understood that because I never believed in hierarchy. And I never believed in hierarchy because I had multiple, I won't say more than 3, because I don't remember. I won't say it was all of them. But I had multiple teachers tell me directly that there was no social hierarchy in the United States. I remember one teacher going on an absolute rant about how we abolish lords and ladies and yada yada yada. You're not even allowed to have multiple citizenship, so we don't have a social hierarchy. But I finished 2 or 3 days ago actually, a lecture course on educating educators. So a lecture course on education, but not on how students learn, not how human beings learn. I have listened to lecture courses on that, but in fact how best practices for teachers. And one thing that I think might be true is that maybe teachers just aren't good at educating. And that's fine. I mean, it sucks, but if they have never been, that they aren't now shouldn't really be a surprise to anyone, and no one should be hanged for it. No, there should be no exemplary hangings, no martyrs made for it. And I know that I'm wildly off topic because I don't even remember why I introduced that, but he said a lot of things, and that had me thinking like, okay, well these are the reasons that I dropped out of college. But I wonder frequently why no adult reached out to me when I was a child. I frequently wonder why no one has tried to mentor me professionally. No, not everyone gets these things, and a lot of people fall through the cracks. And so I don't feel any particular resentment, but I often think about it, and I often try to wonder why. And I know that I've left a thought die about my high school, but I'm still thinking about it. And I wonder if it's not because I labeled myself as disinterested, because I most certainly stopped participating in class, and I most certainly stopped trying. But I also made it very clear to my guidance counselor my freshman year that I was trying to graduate early, that I wanted to be done with school by my junior year, that I wanted to go to university as quickly as possible. Now, I didn't articulate why, but I've also recently learned that you have sort of a record, I guess, that follows you through school of your absences and suspensions and ISSs and detentions and I was a troubled youth. I grew up in an unloving home, and so I didn't tolerate stress at school. So I often wonder if my teachers didn't know that, and if because I went to school when I went to school, there was just sort of a don't ask, don't tell situation, that since I didn't complain about it and I never came to school I never came to high school with bruises or obvious signs of physical neglect. I wonder if they didn't just code me as somebody who didn't care, and they just moved on with their lives, which wouldn't have been the wrong assumption. I hated high school. I hated it there. I hated being there. I hated being in class. But what I hated was not learning, was the ponderousness of the pace, I suppose. And again, I'm off base. I'm trying to think of labels, and I'm trying to think about myself. I'm rather than trying to compare other people and observe other people. I'm trying to observe myself. But I don't know that I'm making any progress. I guess what I'm trying to say, I'm trying to articulate, and I'm trying to demonstrate is that I've never appreciated how important clothing is. And how I suppose the criticism, if there's a criticism, and what I'm noticing, it's my own lack of being observant about other people, vis-a-vis their response to me, or like at least how they perceive me. But I think that really what I'm noticing is that other people, not me people, are really bad at judging other people. I think that what I'm noticing is that people are really bad at making value judgments about other people. And so I think that my broad rejection of labels was a rejection of being told that I have to be any one person, that I can't be a complex, developed person. But I've said before that it seems like everyone's trauma, or at least every crusading person, everyone's crusade is against something that happened to them in high school. And so I think I've said before that you never really leave high school. That high school seems to be the last place that we have any measure of control over our lives in the universe and our places in them. And so I think that what happens is that we stop developing after that, because you don't have to look far to talk to somebody who will say that the politics and the social environment of their workplace is high school. Everyone. I've never heard anyone say about their workplace environment literally anything else. And I'm talking doctors. I've known some people who work at and what we think of as a high level industry, and they all complain about the same thing, which means that there's something going wrong. And it's I said it of myself that I noticed that I wouldn't have developed socially if I had gone to university. And I think that there's a big part of it is that university doesn't exist, and it's not structured in such a way to develop you socially. Now, since I graduated, I didn't graduate university, I dropped out. What I meant to say is since I graduated high school, what I started to say is since I graduated high school, but what I meant to say is since I dropped out of university, I've noticed a lot of people talk, or at least a lot of university administrators talk about how the college curriculum is geared more toward that now, that they're focused more on making you not just a well-rounded, not just a person with a well-rounded education, but a well-rounded individual. And really what that seems to mean is a person who's, what do they say? I'm trying not to say the word inculcate so much. I say the word inculcate a lot. But a person who's indoctrinated to the sort of world, the woke worldview. So I don't think that that's better. Even if some of their ideas about nonviolence and conflict resolution might be good ones, they're not filtering out of the school itself. And so I don't really know what it means that we don't really grow up out of high school. I know that I found it very tedious. I know I found high school extremely tedious, which means that I found the workplace impossibly tedious. The politics, the absolute underdeveloped communication system. Not communication system, but the communication skills of the people in the system. I found it all so predictable and tedious. It's like, guys, are we just not going to learn from our mistakes? But I think that that's what labeling does. I think that militaries, when they give titles, militaries are a good example, but militaries aren't where it started. But I think that when militaries, when they give titles, they give jobs, they have this hierarchy that's expressed, and everyone participates in knowing that it exists and acknowledging that it exists. To link this back to my saying that in the United States, we have this strange desire to deny that hierarchy exists in our country, and trying to talk about, maybe show how, like, maybe the different cliques or the different the different clubs, or maybe they have something to do with social hierarchy. And I think that everybody but me maybe knows that. But they give out these titles because they come with a job description. But there's an aphorism that you if you're a person below a title and a hierarchy, that you're required to respect the title, if not the person bearing it, right? So you respect the title, not the man, is the aphorism. And I don't know that it's really a part of this conversation, but I do know that young people, especially in the workplace, they just disrespect the title. Just having an authoritative title is grounds for disrespect. But that's not really thematically what I'm talking about, even though it sort of is, because a title is a label, and so having an authoritative title labels you as an authoritative person. But that goes sort of to what I'm talking about, where we don't have a complex language of interpretation, or at least a complex system of interpreting symbols and logos like these. And so I wonder if that's a degradation, if that's a loss of an ability, or if it's something that we've never had. And so being two things is just something that until very recently it wasn't really possible to do. I wonder if maybe even before 2000 it wasn't possible to fit into multiple social groups, social cliques. And so, like, being the prep, the jock who also does musicals, maybe that was unthinkable. And so maybe being a goth who plays football is unthinkable, to people, or I don't really understand. I never learned the archetypes, so I don't know enough of them to use examples. But maybe this hybridization and this cross-classing, if you want to use D&D terminology, maybe that, but cross-classing is in social hierarchy or social group, your class. I wonder if the label conversation of the 90s wasn't about what not about so much, but maybe the result of all of that labeling conversation is that we made some labels more important than others, and then we said that some labels can be transitioned into others. Some labels are interchangeable, some labels are optional, and some labels can be outright ignored. But all of that, I suppose, why that all smacks of Plato. That all smacks of the world of forms and Platonism, and young me would be appalled to hear this, but I'm more than a little bit annoyed and skeptical about Platonism and the world of forms. Plato was the entirety of his life. He rejected it multiple times as he got older. I think that he actually died having rejected the world of forms. But what I'm saying is, this all sounds like words with no definition, and that in a way is a lie. And so in a lot of ways it sounds like the way that we handle labels today sounds a lot like lying. And so what I was trying to say when I said that the reason that militaries give out labels is because you're supposed to respect the label, if not the man, is because the label is meant to be aspirational. So it comes with responsibilities and it comes with duties, and those responsibilities and those duties are aspirational, right? So if you're the best, if you're a 10 out of 10 at your title or your position, then if you're the ideal if you're the ideal version of your title, you'll be X, Y, and Z. You'll be these things. But the average person in that title isn't all of those things. They're probably an 8, and then, or a 6 even, is probably closer to average. And then a bad person at that title still has that title and still has those duties and still has those responsibilities. So just be, you have a sliding scale, a gradient doesn't change the title, right? So just because you had a bad manager at your first job doesn't make the position of manager bad. It just means that there's a sliding scale of manager. And likewise for teachers. So just because maybe I had teachers who for whatever reason were unable to reach me or uninterested in reaching me or whatever, I don't really remember well enough. Maybe they did and I was just unresponsive. Maybe if I asked them, they would all tell me that no, they all tried to reach out to me and I was unresponsive. But I don't remember being reached out to. But I wouldn't. I hated being there, and I was in an unloving home, and I most certainly wasn't. I wasn't thinking I was going to find that love outside the home. But also maybe the reason that I remember this and I think about this and I'm still talking about myself about this to this day is because maybe I was hoping that, like the people on TV and in movies, I would have somebody reach out to me and mentor me and want to help me out of that home, which they couldn't have. And so maybe that's why it was just a non-starter issue to me, and so it was just one that I never allowed to be pursued. So from their perspective, maybe they did try to reach out, or maybe they knew that reaching out was a non-starter issue too. And so for them as well as for me, it was just 4 years of enduring my being there, and that's fine. It sucks for both of us, honestly, if that's what it was like having to be around me, but it doesn't have to be that way. I don't think. Maybe it does. Maybe that's why I've been divorced. But yeah, like labels. Even husband was a label that I enjoyed wearing. Because labels are aspirational. Labels come with duties and responsibilities, and maybe that's the real reason that the labels man kind of thing went away, is because as the people who were saying labels man like they were bad grew up, they realized that maybe labels are good, because maybe what they were railing against while they were complaining about labels is maybe they were actually railing against the responsibility and the duties which come with them. And then you become father, or you become business owner, or you become, some minor position, minor leadership position, and you realize, oh no, wait, actually maybe labels and titles are valuable and aspirational, and they give you a goal to shoot toward. Because like I said, and in fact that educational lecture that I listened to agreed with me. School is a school. How do I want to lead into how I said this? School is a task that you can be good at, is what it is, if you want to. And so it wasn't a task that I wanted to be good at, and I think that maybe my teachers knew that I was going to go to college, and so maybe they just endured it. But I don't know. This is why I haven't sat down in front of this mic. I feel particularly confused when I try to think about labels and labeling and whether they are or aren't bad, but I know that I don't know anything. Let's say that. I know that I don't know anything. I do know. I know some things. I don't know. Because what I don't want to talk about is, oh, labels are bad. I don't want to say like, oh, labels are in fact bad. It's not good to label yourself. But I do worry, because like, okay, so current event, right? Hawaii, I guess, is on fire, and our Democrat president is fucking off, and nobody really seems to be up in arms about it, even though I seem to remember when California and Texas were on fire, certain Republican politicians getting their asses reamed by the Democratic mainstream. So who really knows about that? Who really knows whether Hawaii is as devastated as they say it is, or who really knows? But what it seems like to me, knowing a tiny bit about what happened in Hawaii and how Hawaii became a state in the U.S., the Democrats were against them becoming a state, because if they had problems like fires or volcanoes, they would be expensive to get to and have to help. And the Republicans wanted them because having access to their sugar plantations would mean that we would no longer have to compete with them, and therefore American sugar prices would no longer be sugar manufacturer would no longer be uncompetitive in the global market. So it doesn't surprise me that our Democratic president and Democratic government, continental government is what I was trying to say, don't much care about what's going on in Hawaii. But that's kind of what I'm talking about when I talk about labels, and I'm trying to wonder, like
I guess what I'm trying to think is like, is your being a Democrat, does that mean that you have to not care? And so like, if your being a Democrat is because you have enough money to volunteer your kindness, if you're a Democrat because you have enough money that you want to volunteer your kindness, but the Democrats are telling you that you're not allowed to volunteer your kindness to Hawaii, but you want to volunteer your kindness to Hawaii, does helping Hawaii make you in some way a Democratic traitor? And then if you're a traitor to the Democrats, what are you really a traitor to? Because I see that a lot. That kind of rhetoric on social media, but people will say it out loud with their mouths too, like being a traitor to your football team, or like I think I saw somebody say that like if this new player on the Vikings wears the number that he wears, it's a traitor. It's a traitorous action to Adrian Peterson's legacy, which really goes to, I guess, the heart of what I'm talking about when I talk about Platonism and my worry about Platonism and its expressions in the modern world. Is what I'm talking about is words that lack meaning. So if you're a traitor, if a team is a traitor against a player that they cut in ignominy, what's the punishment? And what does it mean? So another thing that I left dangling in one of these episodes, I believe it was 3, was the meaning of the word meaning. What does that mean? What does it mean to mean? And this might be an interesting place to talk about that. So the word mean, not as I'm using it to have meaning, but just the word mean in this language is a word that means average. So common or low, or it really just means average. So it's a mathematics term, really. When you say the mean of this series of numbers, you mean the average of this series of numbers. And so when you say you're being mean, what you're saying is you're being average. And what that means is that you're being normal. You're being an average person. You're not being above the base. And so meaning, to have meaning, is the commonality among normal people. So what basically it's the consensus. So to have meaning is to have a consensus definition, or as far as like what a word or a phrase means. And then, so like the meaning of life is the pursuit, or at least the algorithmic thinking toward or regarding life, which has the best outcome for the most people, or has had the best outcome for the most people. So the meaning of life is the average, the aggregate good life for all people, among all people. And so it's not the same for everyone, but it's the same enough for everyone that you can derive rules like be kind. And that's interesting when you say be kind, because the word kind means like, means kin, it means of a type. And so to be kind to someone literally just means to treat them like they're you, like you're of the same kind, you're the same type, you're the same thing. And so kindness used to be reserved for people who were like you, who were of your kind. So it used to be reserved hierarchically. And I suppose that's what I'm thinking about with labels. And so typing and wearing a label and embracing hierarchy also means reserving kindness for people at your level, because you're not kind to people above you, because they're not your kind, they're not yours, and you're not kind to people below you. Being kind to people below you is called charity. And so wearing labels puts you in this position of constantly having to make value judgments about people. Are they above my station? Are they below my station? Am I being kind to them? Am I being charitable toward them? Am I being generous with them? Right? Because when you're dealing with somebody who's in a higher station, you're actually being generous. They aren't being generous to you. Generosity is freeness. So well, I guess they're being generous to you. They're being free to you. So your grateful is the word I was looking to. But gratitude is the same word as gratuity, but it's what you feel when someone gives you a gratuity, and gratuity is freeness. It's the same word. That's how I got those concepts confused. So, and then grace is what you are. You're gracious when you're good to someone who's in a significantly lower status than you. So the grace of God is him showing any amount of goodness to any human because he's so infinitely higher than us, which is how you know that worldview, the everything post-Augustine and Catholicism, it was just fucked. It was just fucked from the word go with original sin. Augustine completely ruined the Christian faith. I used to think it was Paul, but it wouldn't have been able to be a faith without Paul. So it had to have been Augustine, right? Or the two men together, the culmination of their thought and writing on the subject matter. And that too. So I mean, I'm still talking about something that's a label. So being a Christian is a label, right? But if you label yourself as Christian and do it wrong, you're called a heretic. And a heretic, that word, a heretic, heresy, it comes from the word meaning choice. And specifically what it's referring to is you've made a bad choice. It's so that's what I'm asking when I'm talking about being a Democrat, but also showing sympathy for Hawaiians. Is that heresy? And so what does it mean to be a modern heretic? What does it mean to be to label yourself Republican but behave like a Democrat, or as is the Clinton and post-Clinton Democratic way? Democrat way? What does it mean to be a Republican and call yourself a Democrat? To behave in every way indistinguishable from the opposition, but call yourself something else? What is that? I know it's a lie and I know it's disingenuous, but when you're talking about labeling and you're talking about our inability to quickly and accurately judge people based on their clothing and based on their outer appearance, well, it's obviously a lie and it's a deception. And I don't think it's anything more than that. I really don't think it's deeper than that. I really just think it's a lie and I think it's a deception. So I've said before that authenticity is difficult, and I think that I was implying that I am an authentic person and I'm being authentic. And that's another interesting word, because authentic comes from the same place as author, which comes from the same, which gives the root of authority. And so authentic person sort of has a kind of authority. And I guess what it means is it's kind of like the autograph of a manuscript. To be authentic sort of means to be identical to the autograph or the first copy of a manuscript. And so I suppose to be an authentic person is to compose your story without copying from anyone else's, which is wholly impossible. We're influenced by things that we don't even remember having seen. We're influenced by people that we didn't know lived. I'm constantly talking about how we believe that we're the inheritors of the classical Greek and Roman worlds, and you don't have to know any word of Latin to be speaking English fluently, which is full of Latin words. So you don't have to speak a word of Latin fluently and know that you're speaking Latin fluently to have a classical Roman worldview built into your world. You're influenced by people who lived so long before you that you don't even need to know they lived. to be influenced by them. So being authentic is almost impossible. And that's something that I struggled with when it came to creative writing, was trying to be authentic, to not do things that I had seen in the work that I like, and to not allow my influences to appear in my work. And what I found is that I kept not being original, and so every time I would try to do something authentic or something original or something autographical, every time I would find somebody else had done it and done it better, because I was constantly trying to reinvent a wheel 10,000 years, or however, it's not been 10,000 years, 4,000 years after the wheel was invented. But that's how I am. That's the kind of person that I am. And I suppose that's what I thought in my mind but didn't say out loud, is that I constantly have to double check the math. So when someone says something, I have to, well, is that true? And I've spent a lot of my life doing that. And so I think along the lines of growing up in the 90s and labels, something that I've noticed is, I think that might be what the liberal worldview is a sort of pathological demand avoidance about not reinventing the wheel. It's like, okay, well, we've already established that being unkind to people is not the way to live, and so liberals went, oh, is that true? Well, let's see if that's true, for an example. And so I talked about how our government right now, the way it works is, let's try something new every 4 years and then change our mind every 2. And that is what liberalism is. And so, like, when you talk about the snake of chaos or whatever, and how much women hate that, I've talked about that before, that it's change and it's evolution, and women don't like this idea that they're changing and evolving, because they don't like the idea that they're beholden to their hormones in whatever way, and so they want to behave like men by turning them off, and that's confusing. But that's what I'm actually talking about. And so I think that the risk of the label is sort of the idea of thinking that you can take it off, because, like, a label isn't it, like, when we're talking about labeling ourselves or wearing a label, these are metaphors. You're not actually wearing a name tag, and it doesn't actually say, hi, my name is blank, and I am this list of interests. You're not actually your dating profile. In fact, the fuller your dating profile is with labels and information about you, the less likely you are to be an interesting person. But I don't know what that means. I think that because I think that there's an inclination. I think that I might be thinking that there will be an inclination among people who hear this to look for a value judgment, because you, not so much me, but humans are constantly trying to value judge, because you think that you need to know. You think that it's important and it's valuable to know a piece of information at the critical time. And so you think that things can have value, and that you can accurately judge it, and that, in fact, your brain is designed to accurately make judgments based on value. And if economics have done anything, it's proved that that's just as wrong as a theory can possibly be. Humans are terrible at value judgments. Intelligence, if you want to measure intelligence as a scale of being able to accurately make judgments and to be valuable in how you use information, you're so far off the point, the word no longer has any meaning, because that's a whole range of other things. So I think that there's this impulse in you when I start talking about how bad we are at things, or the risks of labels, to value judge. Okay, well, do this over that, weigh this more heavily than that, value this more highly than that. And that's a trap, first of all. It's a trap to do it, and it's a trap for me to be worried about you thinking in that way and looking for a value judgment, because now, I've gone and forgot the greater thing that I needed to say, and thinking, well, if I say that, they're gonna be dissatisfied, because that doesn't come with a value judgment. I need to stop thinking about you like you're an audience anyway, because an audience, the word just means listeners, basically, the people who are listening. And it's only with maybe the last 50 years that audiences have gone to things that they wanted to see, knowing that they wanted to see it. And really, it's only been since the internet era that people have gone to things wanting to see them, knowing what they're going to see. You didn't spoil yourself for plays and movies and these things in the ancient world, and not even the ancient world, in the pre-modern world. Like, I was recently learning about Shakespeare's Globe Theatre, and that was like a production of the television show Community. They got their script the day of, and it changed every day. The show that they did changed every day. So you didn't go to the theater knowing what you were going to see. You weren't a member of the audience knowing what you were going to hear. You were a member of the audience because you were going to hear. Because you were the people there to hear. Because you really weren't even able to see the stage. So I really need to stop thinking of you as people who know what you're coming here to listen to, and as people who are coming here because they want to listen to something. And maybe I say interesting things, which really opens the door for me to talk about what I'm doing and why I'm doing it in this way and how I'm doing it. But I really don't want to talk about that this time. I really do want to try to talk about labels, because labels are about representation, and then I would like to try to squeeze myself empty of labels, and then I would like to revisit the microphone and do the same about representation once I've said everything that I need to, that I can think of to say about labels. Because once I flesh out labels, I can talk about representation, because we don't just put labels on ourselves. And then once I talk about representation, then I can start to maybe meaningfully talk about ritual. Yeah, just ritual. That was going to be ritual something else, and I wasn't sure what. But because I think that that's moving backward on the abstract pole, right? To go back to our tower or our pyramid. I think that is a plan for how to talk about this without and still really say nothing, but it moves at least backward conceptually down the pole. Because labels, I think my hesitation with labels is that labels give the impression of finality. So if you put a label on this is what it is, it's all it is, it's all it'll ever be. So like labels on food products are extremely comprehensive, and what's in it, what it's going to do to your body, etc. They're extremely comprehensive about the product. And so I wonder if labeling things that we don't have comprehensive information about is... Oh, I don't wonder. I can see plainly as I try to say the statement that it's a danger, that it's a bad idea, and that it's a major risk to civilization. If you were to, well, maybe not to civilization. That's being hyperbolic with but it's a major risk to you individually. But it because, first of all, labeling yourself in a way is stupid because you don't have comprehensive information about yourself. You do not have a comprehensive understanding of what is inside your bottle. If you were a jar of... I don't know why I have Prego. I have a tomato sauce in my head is the image as I'm thinking about labeling inanimate objects. I have a tomato can. Not even a tomato can, pasta sauce can in my head. I don't know why pasta sauce was so hard for me to get out of my mouth. But and this is another thing that I've never understood about the impulse to label, is there's more about us that we want to obscure from the world than that we want the world to see us. So I suppose that there's a comfort in labels because you can wear a facile label and then keep all that other stuff hidden. So like if I didn't want the world to know, and I didn't care whether the world did or didn't, but if I wanted to actively hide from the world that I had an unloving family, I could have done my very best to be preppy, right? To dress in expensive clothes and act and behave in that particular way. Or I could have hung out with the goth kids or whatever. I could have hung out in a clique. And so I think that maybe hiding in a clique is a way to hide in plain sight. And that there are a lot of people that do that. There are more people who do that than who don't do that. And hiding in plain sight doesn't necessarily have to be about being a narcissist or about being a psychopath or a sociopath. It doesn't have to be about being a wolf in any way. Like, you don't have to be trying to hurt anyone. In fact, you could be a sheep hiding in wolf's clothing. Or maybe even a sheepdog hiding in golden retriever clothing. Who knows? Yeah, it doesn't have to be... While a deception, it doesn't also have to be punishable in any sort of way. It doesn't have to be a crime, right? And so that's sort of what I was asking. I said, well, it is a deception, but what can we call it? Something other than a deception when I was talking about, maybe being more than one label. Or not wanting certain people to know what your label is. I think that's what I was talking about when I used the term deception, and I said that I don't really want to use the term deception or lie because those come with they're words that come with moral value judgments. But I suppose a deception is putting a thought in someone's head that's wrong, if an inception is putting a thought in someone's head. And so, I don't know... Well, okay. Not every deception... deception comes on a sliding scale, and so not every deception is bad, but I don't know that we have a sliding scale of terminology for deception. Because... We've all watched a kid's cartoon, Even what the deceiver might think is the slightest meaningless deception can be world-ending to other people, Like, it used to be trivial when I was a kid, but like the boy who thinks that his male best friend is his male best friend finds out that his male best friend is actually a female is shattered. Right? That changes everything. All of these feelings that I've been having for you, they're not gay. Like, right? So there's... I suppose what I'm noticing is that there's been a lot of work to undermine the value in labeling, but there's also been a lot of work done to reinforce the bindingness of a label. So like once you say you're gay as a label, you're gay, and that means that whether you act or dress or talk or whatever in a particular way, you are the label gay now. If the best you can do is the best you can do if you want to not be gay anymore is to lean into some sort of bisexuality or maybe even transition genders, and then the labeling becomes extremely complicated as young people find out immediately. Or you can do the humiliating thing and be some sort of reformed homosexual. But all of this labeling, it's extremely humiliating. It's extremely humiliating and dehumanizing, in my opinion. Like, you can do what I did and just not care about labels, not label yourself, and then find that people mislabel you, and we don't make a big deal about it. But mislabeling someone, I feel like, well, now we do. There are certain protected labels. So, like, if you acronym someone, misletter someone on the LGBTQ plus scale, or if you misgender someone, right? But mislabeling someone, right? Calling someone who's a band geek a jock, for instance, that's just as harmful to the psyche as dead naming someone or just calling someone by the wrong name, which is something that I know I've spoken about before. Not letting people call you by the wrong name, and so labels in a sense, in that context, if we're talking about being able to defend yourself and get offended about something, labels are a sort of territorial staking out. You can say, well, I'm not that thing and I will fight you if you call me this other thing, right? So labeling yourself as a Democrat does give you a certain control over at least the way that people perceive you. You say, no, I'm a Democrat. You wouldn't say, like, if they called you a Republican, you have grounds to get upset. But that makes me wonder if labels aren't only and exclusively a grounds for getting upset, right? But that can't be true because, like I said, you label your jar of pasta sauce to identify A, the manufacturer, but B, what's in it. So labels in a lot of ways, brand labeling is hugely important. I should think more seriously about brand labeling and how important it would be for me and getting people to actually sit and listen to me for 2 hours. I'm not going to, but not right now. But brand labeling is hugely important. These multinational mega corporations wouldn't spend billions of dollars a year on branding and labeling if it didn't matter. And so it can be helpful. It can be extremely helpful to the consumer. But like, at what point are we only consumers? And so like at what point does your overriding label become consumer? And at what point, like, I guess what I really want to know is, has it ever not been? Because even pre-civilizational hunter-gatherers, soloists, so to speak, even they are consumers. They're still shopping the world, looking for food and a partner for procreation. So I mean, you're still shopping. You're still value judging this and value judging that, and you're definitely consuming product, right? Even if it's product that only you made, or just, to coin a term, natural product, right? So like just the produce of plants and animals. The world as such, you're still a consumer, and you're still bargaining with that, even if, or in that, even if you're just bargaining with, yourself or God, that there will be food around the next corner. And I mean, that sounds more like a gamble than like a bargain, but I mean, it's a gamble really anytime you buy anything, isn't it? Anytime you consume anything is a gamble. It's a bet that it won't kill you, or that it won't go badly, or that it won't break as soon as you get home, or whatever. It is, everything is a bet against Murphy's Law, right? And so maybe what I'm wondering is if maybe if other people trying to have complex lives and be complex people isn't a mistake. Because I don't think it was a mistake for me to be a complex person. But I wonder if maybe people with less developed observational skills and critical thinking skills aren't done a disservice. Because what I don't want to say is have whatever taken away, because I don't think that they should be banned or barred. I don't think there should be any sort of certification, right, on being allowed to label yourself. So like, I don't think that you should have to, like, as a grotesque example, I don't think that you should have to film yourself having psychosexual drama in order to prove where you fit on the LGBTQ plus scale. That would be an argument from absurdum, or ad absurdum, right? You don't need to earn or prove your certification, but like, gatekeeping exists because people will claim certifications they don't have. So now we're back to the guild argument. So like, if I'm a metalhead and I want to hang out with other metalheads, or at least say that I'm a metalhead, do I have to have listened to a certain number of bands? Now, what if I'm a metalhead and I say I'm a metalhead and I go up and I go out and I beat up a bunch of I go and I beat up a bunch of preps, right? Saying, oh, well, I'm a metalhead and this is what metalheads do. Well, how do you and now remember, I'm a metalhead who doesn't actually listen to metal, right? I just want to be seen being a metalhead, right? So what do you, as a person who is a metalhead and does listen to metal and does think that violence against non-metalheads, just to take this to an absurd place, is abhorrent? You think that that's abhorrent. What do? Well, you have to distance yourself, so you have to gatekeep, so you have to say, well, you have to know X number of bands. You have to be able to prove that you're a metalhead. In order to be allowed to call yourself a metalhead. But that does then raise the question of entry-level metalheads, right? So like, I want to be a metalhead too, and I'm just starting to listen to metal, but I don't have an infinite amount of time or money, and I don't have a lot of friends, right? So how do you make friends? How do you get in, so to speak? How do you become a metalhead? Well, that goes back to what we were talking about when we were talking about guilds and we're talking about actual certification. So like, for an example, in order to say that you were a Pythagorean, you had to go through the Pythagorean cult. You had to go through the initiation ceremony, which included 10 years of nonverbal communication. You weren't allowed to speak for the first 10 years within the cult. I think it was 10 years. That just seems like such an absurdly long time that it can't be right. But maybe it was on like conditional of something. But anyway, you have to go through all the rites, and then once you pass through all the rites, then you get to call yourself the thing. And if you call yourself the thing and you haven't done the thing, then you die. That's how cult used to work back in the day, right? So, like, if you said you were in the Illuminati, for an example, the Bavarian Illuminati, which actually did exist, but you weren't a member of the Bavarian Illuminati, there was a very good chance someone was going to kill you for having said so, right? And if you say you're a doctor, but you're not a doctor, you're very likely to kill someone else. But there are punishments, for these things. But what's the punishment for saying you're a philosopher? I think that I came back to that. I think that I am coming back to an idea of language usage, where I said, like, what's the punishment for betrayal, right? Because to be treasonous, or to betray, to be a traitor, that's what I meant. To betray something is a serious crime, right? Like, to treason against the king was punished by death. Like, there was no other question. You died, right? And so I don't know. I just was watching a couple of my fish get into a fight, and it distracted me. What are you talking about, Vincent? You're talking about words and what they mean, and you're talking about degrees of seriousness, and you're talking about reality, and you're talking about labels, and calling yourself one thing and maybe being another thing, or maybe not being all of that thing. And so, do you need certification to be a philosopher? Well, you'd think you'd have a college education or whatever, but okay, fine. Do you need a certification to be a writer? Well, you ideally should be published before you go around calling yourself a writer. If you call yourself a writer just for doing the act of writing, it devalues the writing that other people have done as professionals. But what does it matter what you call yourself? Because it's like a nickname. Like in high school, if you give yourself a nickname in high school, what value does it have? So what value does it have if I start calling myself King Tut? Because I can see the words in front of me. I couldn't think of anything clever. Like, if I just start calling myself a nickname, or I just start calling myself a plumber, what value does it have unless I can actually do the thing? And so I guess what I'm wondering is if other people are as skeptical of claims to be thing as I am. When somebody claims to be a thing, maybe I'm just hyper skeptical. And maybe other people don't take labels as seriously as I think they do. Someone calls themselves a blank. Other people are like, well, he's not really anything. Until they see him doing that thing, and then everybody needs that sort of acknowledgement at all times. But that can't be right, or Taylor Swift wouldn't be popular. Because Taylor Swift is popular because she has the label of popular assigned to her, and so people are like, oh, well, she's an event in herself. And so maybe it is that labels are aspirational, and maybe it is that people aren't good at interpreting labels, and they're not good, because I'll tell you, people aren't good at reading nutritional information. They don't know what that shit means. They don't know where to look on the packaging for particular information, and it doesn't seem like a pertinent life skill. And so by that same token, I never thought that it was a pertinent life skill to know. Well, I never thought it was a pertinent life skill to dress in a particular way. I absolutely understood that it was a pertinent life skill to identify people by their dress, but I might be unique in that. And unique is too, first of all, unique. It's just too strong of a word. It suggests that I'm literally the only person, but I don't think that's true. But it might be exceptional about me. I might be in a small minority of people who pay enough attention and have stored enough data from those observations to make good judgments based on the way people dress, the way people carry themselves, move their faces and their bodies, their hands, etc. And see, that comes with the suggestion of a value judgment too, when I say, oh, well, maybe other people just aren't as good at it. It seems like I'm judging, like I'm sitting up in a place where I'm like, well, I'm better at you than this. And really, for me, it's more of a, oh, maybe I need to cut the world some slack, and maybe I need to think objectively about how to teach people how to do this thing. Like, what to look for in people. And that gets me thinking about duty and responsibility, and it being my or not my responsibility to teach other people things that are easy to learn from other sources of information. Which isn't what this is about. Because labels are also helpful in knowing where to go for sources of information, and this particular label, the hermit talking to himself, isn't exactly a label that says that you're going to find information that's pertinent to your life. It suggests what I want to talk about eventually. What I should have talked about in the first episode is what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. It doesn't suggest any of those things. And I don't want it to. It should suggest what it suggests, that I'm talking to myself about what I'm thinking about and what's pertinent to my life. But communication and collusion in that way, collusion in this way is important, because I guess now I'm talking about it, but a skill set that we also don't have is listening. So I suppose that what we're not good at, and what I'm talking about when I'm talking about labeling, and when I'm talking about me thinking that labeling is maybe dangerous, but also trying to be reminded that if I have a perspective, someone has the opposite, so the opposite perspective must be that labels are necessary and good in some way, and I've demonstrated that they are necessary and good in some way. I think I know I forgot how that sentence ended. I think that what we're not good at is observing. I think well, I don't think that. I know that that's how that sentence ends. But I think that we have a sort of Dunning-Kruger about making observations about the world, because we're doing it all the time. Whether we know it or not, we're observing the world. In fact, among the only things that we were able to do when we were first born, when we were very small, until we were 2, was observe and learn and mimic. And so when I talk about representation, I'm going to have to talk a lot about, and I'm going to have to expand out on the fact of, but imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. And so if you have a label and someone wants to be like you or wear your label, well, they're flattering you. So in a lot of ways, little white kids wanting to pretend to be little black kids is not appropriation, it's flattery. It's imitation, but it's imitation in its sincerest and healthiest form. So I don't know that means that we shouldn't wear labels. I think that maybe what I'm noticing is an impulse toward maybe wanting to shield my label for myself and hold my label precious. Or maybe it's a reticence to be labeled so that same thing, so I never have to share it, so that it's mine, and if I'm unlabeled, I remain precious. Or maybe in remaining unlabeled, I am demanding observation and careful attention, and that demand for observation and careful attention is interpreted as a particular kind of narcissism, as a particular kind of representation and ritual attention grabbing. And so maybe my making myself a complex and interesting person just looked like, rather than the kind of person that you can ask questions of and get interesting answers, the kind of person who wants you to ask questions because they don't have interesting answers. And so that's an interesting paradox. And it's the kind of thing that I react to with hopelessness, that I go, well, there's no solution. This is insoluble. If I look interesting, I come off as uninteresting. And really but that's not a me thing. And that's why it feels insoluble to me, because you can't solve other people's issues. So if other people are unattentive and other people aren't willing to notice you, and other people aren't willing to observe their environments, whether immediate or unimmediate, so whether on the macro or the micro levels, is it your responsibility to inform them? And I've talked a little bit about this, about campfires, when I was talking about being woke and about the AAVE, like, using your language to build the campfires of the people around you. So fleshing out the knowledge about reality of the people around you so that they can better interact. And so and that way I've demonstrated that I do in some way think that it is my responsibility to make sure that the people around me, or that anyone listening to my voice, knows truths, or at least is reminded to think twice about what they think they know. And so, like, maybe that's what this is, labels. Maybe what I'm saying is, maybe think twice about what you think a label is, because sometimes what a label means changes too. Because when I was a kid, being a nerd was bad, but now being a nerd is good. So there are a whole slew of people now that the people with the inclination toward gatekeeping because of resentment, because it didn't used to be cool, are saying, well, now there's a whole group of people that are changing what it means to be a nerd by not actually being nerds. And that's interesting, because things change, and wanting a thing to stay the same is conservatism, and wanting to change it for the sake of change, wanting to expand the definition of what a thing is for the sake of doing that thing, is what liberalism is in some fundamental way. Like, that's where their divide is. And so I don't know that there's an answer. I don't know that it's bad for Comic-Con, for example, for there to be 15% or 75 or 175% more nerds in the world, or at least more people willing to consume nerd content. I most certainly know that it wasn't bad for Disney Marvel that there was suddenly an explosion of people who were interested in nerd content. But also, if what you want and what you valued about the nerd culture was having deep and meaningful conversations about nerd culture, because everyone involved had the same depth of exposure to nerd culture, yeah, I can absolutely understand why this influx of people with no interest in the depth or the breadth of the culture are upsetting to you, because suddenly your beloved, deep, meaningful conversations are gone. So in a lot of ways, that's why I'm doing this, is deep, meaningful conversation is void from my life. So I have to talk to myself deeply in order to approach meaning. And I wonder how that has anything to do with labels, because I'm sure that there's something there about everything being entry level. Because labels, when you used to have to wear a costume, well, everyone who wore the same outfit as you did had the same issues. So, like, if you go out in public in your Kroger shirt, well, everyone who's wearing a Kroger shirt knows the same things that you do. They have the same rough life experience that you do. At least they all have the same experience of Kroger that you do, and the differences in experience mean that you can have deep and meaningful conversations, an infinitude of them, for the rest of your lives. Any two people wearing a Kroger shirt, and that was the same. So if you were a Freemason, or you were a miller, or you were a grape presser, or whatever you did, whatever your profession was, you wore the clothing of your profession, and everyone who dressed like you knew the same things that you knew, and you could have deep, meaningful conversation with them at all times. But now, today, if this happened to Dave Mustaine. Dave Mustaine, founder and I think now only original member of Megadeth, I believe it was in Sweden, and saw a teenage girl wearing a Megadeth shirt, so he filmed himself